one on water and one on volcanoes, one on sheep herding, and several others. Indian weaving will be one of them, and we hope to always find them interesting. Today I want to introduce Teresa Orton. She is the director of our museum. She has so many creative ideas and keep improving our museum amazingly with displays and bringing things out of storage that we still have. All our items are from pioneers who originally settled here in the valley and their families. If you haven't been upstairs, I strongly encourage you to go wander through the museum. You'll find many, many interesting things. Teresa is going to be presenting our program this morning on the pioneer era from 1847, although St. George was not developed then. These are when the pioneers first came into Utah. And this period has so many wonderful inventions. It's amazing when you start thinking about it. And Teresa's done an excellent job, I'm sure. And she tries to keep us all busy and keeping everything moving right here in the museum. We do have a gift shop upstairs. It's our only means of supporting the museum here. Please go up and check them out. We have some wonderful items for boys, girls, and adults. And at this time, I think I'll turn this meeting over to Teresa.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody that came out today. When we talk about the event title, it kind of did sound very exciting. But a little background about why we picked this. There was a DUP, Daughters of Utah Pioneers, lesson about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was about this pioneer era. And I read through the lesson, and I was just fascinated by the information that was presented. I've always been very interested in understanding more about what happens in the world at any particular one time. So today we have access to news from around the world almost instantaneous. And back when we consider the pioneer era, we think people are more isolated and maybe not as current in their thinking. So that's what prompted me to start thinking about doing a presentation about this particular time period. So, come on. Okay. It's a 22-year period. Now, 22 years, what does that represent? In the space of 22 years, a young man, Jesse James, is born, raised, becomes a robber. He actually robs a bank. He kills someone and becomes a murderer, all within 22 years. So there's a lot of time that can pass, and we look at our children and we see how quickly they grow up. But then you look back on your job or your career and you think, well, that was just yesterday. So 22 years can be very quick or pretty short. The pioneer era, what does that represent? So the first company of pioneers arrived in Salt Lake Valley in July of 1847. This was the beginning of the Utah pioneer era, and it's sometimes called the Mormon pioneer era. And it ended when the Transcontinental Railroad was connected at Promontory Point in 1869. There are many settlers who came to Utah Territory in that period, but that is what is called the pioneer era. So whenever you hear the people talk about pioneers, Mormon pioneers, that's what they're talking about. So who were these people? This is the definition they give to a pioneer in the pioneer era. A person who traveled to or through the geographic area known as the state of Deseret or the Utah Territory between 1847 and May 10th, 1869. Also included in this group are those people who already lived here, or died along the way, or were born in the territory during that era. So we talk about the wagon trains, the handcart companies. There were a total of 17 wagon companies that arrived in Salt Lake Valley in 1847. 8 followed in 1848, and 10 came in 1849. And it kept increasing every year until 1852. There were 35 wagon trains. There were 10 in total handcart companies, which amounted to 5% of the pioneer travelers. 2 of those handcart companies were the ones that had significant difficulties and tragedies. 66,000 immigrants traveled in wagon trains and handcart companies. A total of 80,000 people met the criteria to be a Utah pioneer. Did we think that there were that many? It's kind of amazing when you stop and think about it. This right here is just a map of what constituted the Utah Territory or the state of Deseret. It's pretty big. It includes what we now have as Arizona, Nevada, Utah, part of California. So that's why 80,000 people is not quite as an astonishing number. The end of the pioneer era came when the two railroads were connected at Promontory Point on May 10th in 1869. The Union Pacific Railroad came from the west, and the Central Pacific Railroad came from the east. And they met in Utah Territory. The Chinese workers, which this is a picture of them, were responsible for making the rapid development of the railroad possible. They held the record of laying 10 miles of track in one day. 10,000 Chinese immigrants were employed by Central Pacific Railroad Company, which is a pretty amazing amount when you consider that once the railroad was finished, what happened to all of those people? That's another story. So in 1847, the travel west began. There's many stories about why that started. The movement of the LDS Church members began going west. So what happened in 1847 in addition to that movement? Yerba Buena changed its name to San Francisco. U.S. Marines won the battle over Los Angeles, thus ending the war with Mexico. And the Mormon Battalion ends up in San Diego in July of 1847. Britain's Parliament passes a law that limits the amount of time per day that women and children can work to 10 hours. Thank God. The Donner Party becomes stranded in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The magazine Scientific American, published in 1845, had contributions from Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, and Nikola Tesla. And we think of them as later inventors, but these were young men, and they were thinking and very intelligent. The invention of antiseptics by, now I'm going to slaughter this name, Ignatius Semmelweis of Hungary occurred. Midwives and doctors were able to clean their instruments and prevent the spread of bacteria. The year before, anesthesia was first introduced in tooth extractions, changing forever surgery, medicine, and childbirth. And we don't think of antiseptic and as far back as that, but they were preparing. 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe officially ends the war between the U.S. and Mexico. The women's rights movement begins in New York. Karl Marx publishes the Communist Manifesto. Gold is discovered in California. 1849, Karl Marx is ordered out of Paris and relocates to London. An outbreak of cholera in New York City claims 5,000 lives. The gold rush begins. Eugene Bourdon patents the Bourdon gauge for pressure measurement in France. Those of us that don't work in manufacturing probably don't appreciate that nearly as much. David Brewster perfects the stereoscope. Does anyone know what a stereoscope is? Yes. This is a stereoscope. We have this here. We called it a Viewmaster when I was young. So you look through it, you have many pictures, but that is the first known stereoscope. Erastus Bigelow first applied power to a carpet weaving loom in the U.S. And this was probably one of the major inventions of the time, the safety pin. Yeah. That little thing has not changed in function or design since it was first done in 1849. Prior to that, just imagine, all of your clothes, if you had anything that was ill-fitting or torn, they had pins, straight pins. People were getting poked and stuck, and children cried. But just this with a diaper was a miracle. Yeah. We don't appreciate the little things. In 1850, U.S. Congress passes the Fugitive Slave Act, requiring government support for capturing escaped slaves, and the northern states protest the act. Steam engines power 5% of ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean. The jigsaw puzzle was invented. Who does jigsaw puzzles? Yeah. Now you know when it started, right? It was just a fad, by the way. The first dishwasher was patented in the U.S. by Joel Houghton. It was a wooden machine with a hand-powered wheel that splashed water on dishes. I'm sure that was very effective. 1851, Ridley Stripper, a mechanical harvester invented in Australia, revolutionizing agriculture. Moby Dick by Herman Melville was published. Isaac Merritt Singer patented his foot-powered sewing machine. Now, we have one here in the museum, but I didn't drag it in here. It was not a new concept necessarily, but changed the hire or purchase concept system. Changed how people made their clothes. Instead of hiring it done or have to hand sew it, it really changed people's thinking about how clothes were made. And one thing you will notice in this presentation, I am not talking about the changes in fashions and clothes, because it would take days to go through this. So purposely, I left that out. Elias Howe, Jr. invented and patented a zipper-style clothing and boot fasteners, but they didn't work very well, and so he moved on to sewing machines, and he invented the first sewing machine, and we have one of those as well. It was 42 years before the zipper was actually made. That whole concept was redesigned. And thank God. Don't you just love zippers? James King patented the first hand-powered drum washing machine. The Ballarat hook was invented to save lives of miners. And I read through that and I thought, that's a picture of a Ballarat hook holding a bucket. Well, what it is for is, and why it saved lives, the miners were down in the mine down below, and they were lowering and raising or different tools, things like that. The hooking device was very feeble, and oftentimes it broke and hit miners and killed them. So when they developed this, that the bucket would not come loose. And so ultimately it saved a lot of lives when they did that. Small, simple thing. In 1852, it became illegal in southern states to own a copy of the recently published Uncle Tom's Cabin. German sweet chocolate introduced by Salmon German, eventually used in German chocolate cake. I often wondered why it was called German chocolate cake. Well, it wasn't because it was made in Germany or anything else. It was that he developed a sweet sweet chocolate, and that's what they ended up using in this cake, so they called it German chocolate cake. Yeah, I wish I had a piece for every one of you. Laudner Phillips patented a submarine propeller designed for subs to go down to 30 meters. 2 German men tried to improve on the whale hunting technology by electrifying the whale harpoon or spear, sending 8 electric shocks, which were guaranteed to kill it. So at the same time, we're trying to still stay in the whale hunting business. And I'm not sure that it worked. A charcoal iron was patented, which was better than the flat irons because it stayed hot longer. And I have a sample of a charcoal fueled iron right here. And the advancement from the flat iron, which had to be heated on the stove, to this, which kept a constant heat, and you didn't have to stop and reheat, and that made a huge difference. It was such a time saver. The Bunsen burner is invented by Robert Wilhelm Bunsen in Heidelberg, Germany. 1853, the Gadsden Purchase gives the United States a strip of land in the southwest that would later become the states of New Mexico and Arizona. The glider was invented in England by George Calais. In London, in 1854, the clock tower Big Ben is completed. Scientist John Snow in London identifies dirty water as the source of cholera outbreaks. Daniel Halliday patented the first commercially used windmill. The Republican Party was founded in Ripon, Wisconsin. Are we so happy about that? 1855, the capital of Japan, Edo, modern-day Tokyo, is largely destroyed by an earthquake, tsunami, and fire. And how many have they had since then? 1856, the first railway bridge across the Mississippi River is completed, spanning a 3-mile stretch between Rock Island, Illinois, and Davenport, Iowa. Laudner Phillips, again, patented a submarine exploring armor. And that's a sketch. Wouldn't you love to go down in that? Boy, if it leaked, you were in big trouble. The first kindergarten in the U.S. was founded by Marguerite Schurz. Louis Pasteur developed the process of pasteurization, thus improving food safety. 1857, the Dred Scott decision of the U.S. Supreme Court rules that African Americans, whether free or slave, are not citizens and have no legal rights. Elisha Otis installs the first freight elevator. This is in 1857, and the freight elevator was just simply to move freight things from one floor to another. In 1861, he invents the elevator brake for safely lowering heavy loads. So can you imagine what they did before? It must have taken every man on the job to control it so it didn't just fall down to the bottom. 1867, the first passenger elevator was installed. And I think I've been on some that were invented in 1857. My husband and I went to Spokane, Washington, and there was an old converted building, and they made it into offices, and it used the freight elevator, and I swear, from one floor to the other took about a week. It was very slow. 1858. Canned food was invented before the can opener. Ezra J. Warner of Connecticut invented the can opener. The canning process was developed in the early 1800s for a practical way to preserve food for Napoleon's army. The first can opener was a hammer and a chisel, or somehow poke a hole in it. And then Warner's device was a series of blades to puncture and then saw off the top of the can. It was quite dangerous because it left very sharp edges, but it got the job done. In 1859, John Brown and his supporters began an uprising of free slaves in the U.S., and they were not successful, and he was tried, convicted, and hanged. Northern Pennsylvania is the site of the first successful commercial oil well in the U.S. Etienne Lenoir in Paris invented the first successful gas engine. In 1860, most important, potato chips were invented, yes. But Pringles didn't come along until 1960. The combustion and non-combustion engines are invented. Jews are allowed to vote in England. Theodore Parker plays a prominent role in nonviolent civil disobedience in the U.S. designed to limit the capture of fugitive slaves. The Winchester repeating rifle was invented by Oliver Chase Winchester. The Pony Express riders leave Sacramento and St. Joseph, Missouri on April 3rd, 1860, and 10 days later arrive at their destination to deliver the mail. Now, quote, this is 1860, right? 1861, Abraham Lincoln takes office and assures the southern states that he will not interfere with the institution of slavery. Some southern states declare secession from the Union, and Jefferson Davis resigns from the Senate to become the Confederate president. Civil war breaks out in the U.S. Oil refining begins in Pennsylvania. The bicycle was invented in France by Pierre Michaud. The first transcontinental telegraph was completed in October of 1861, signaling the end of the Pony Express. Pony Express went for 18 months only. But everybody knows what the Pony Express was. Isn't that incredible? The first color photograph was revealed by James Clerk Maxwell to the Royal Institution of Great Britain. The Bloomingdale's department store, now owned by Macy's, was founded by the Bloomingdale brothers. 1862, the first paper money is issued in the U.S. And I have here a copy of script that was issued here in the state of Deseret or Utah Territory. It's 10 cents for the Bishop's Storehouse. And it says, this script is payable in produce and merchandise and is not current except at the Bishop's Storehouse. So that's the only place you could use it. I don't think they'd get very far if they issued money that way today. Les Miserables by Victor Hugo is published. Anna Leon Owens, the woman depicted in The King and I, arrives in Bangkok to teach English. Mining in the Rocky Mountains brings clashes between the Lakota Sioux Indians and the miners. Nancy Smith in Oskaloosa, Iowa, was nominated as a joke for the mayoral election, and she won. She declined to hold the office, but she was the first woman elected as mayor in the U.S. Plastic was invented in England by Alexander Parkes. It's not plastic as we know it today. It was then called celluloid, but it was the same type of process. 1863, the first subway system opens in London. Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation is signed into law. The New York draft riots last for 3 days. Did you know about the New York draft riots and what they were? The Union Army was trying to get more soldiers. There was a lot of disagreement, obviously, about the war, and so they instituted a draft. And in New York, they were protesting this draft. And for 3 days, the city of New York was like under siege. We talk about the riots that have gone on in California and other places, but that's what they did. They destroyed businesses and homes. There were people killed, and it was really a bad situation. President Lincoln issues the Thanksgiving Proclamation due to Sarah Hale. 1864, Gatling guns are used in the U.S. Civil War. Charles Parker invented the coffee grinder and got a patent for the Parker No. 60. Now, the Parker No. 60 is one of the first coffee grinders that you crank, and then you could reduce the beans into where you would steam them. And it was quite a novel invention, which went on to spur inventions of the same type for other things, of grinding them down. Between 1861 and 67, the typewriter was developed by several inventors. Now, I have right here, as part of our collection, this is an Underwood Standard wide carriage typewriter. And so this one, The entire concept probably was not fully invented until probably after 1867, but the whole idea of this started in 1861, and they finally came to fruition about 67. But boy, what a change that it made in lives. And we could talk about carbon paper, and that was an incredible invention. Yeah, 1865. Miners in Colorado clashed with Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians, and many on both sides were killed. The Civil War ends in April. Then President Lincoln is assassinated. The Yale lock, also called the cylinder lock, was invented by Linus Yale in the U.S. The Winnebago Indians are placed on a reservation in Nebraska after being removed from Iowa, Minnesota, and the Dakota Territory. The first Chinese railroad workers are hired. Mark Twain sold his first successful short story. The first cowboy hat was designed by John Stetson. It was referred to as the boss of the plains. I thought this was great. Why is it called a 10-gallon hat? It only holds about 3 quarts of liquid, and it started with the Spanish word galeon, which means braid, a decoration referred to as 10 galeones, which would be 10 galeones, number of braids, not the capacity of the hat. Cowboys misunderstood the word, and the legend of the 10-gallon hat was born. Yeah. How many times do we see that? People misunderstand what they heard, and then you never can change it back. 1866. The American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals is founded. The first staple and stapler were made in the U.S. Now, I love this. King Louis XV had staples made specifically for him. Each staple was meticulously engraved with his insignia of the monarch, and legend has it that these ornate staples were made from gold and encrusted with special precious gemstones. Can you imagine a paper clip or a staple? The first paper fastener made in the U.S. used a device to insert the staple, but you had to cramp it or crimp it by hand, one staple at a time. And I've had staplers that is exactly what you had to do, one staple at a time. In 1877, the stapler that we know and love was invented. 1867, the Blue Danube Waltz by Johann Strauss premieres in Vienna. The practice of estimating the age of a tree by counting the rings begins. George Pullman invents the first sleeper car for railroad travel. Barbed wire was invented by Lucian B. Smith from Kent, Ohio, and patented. Russia finalizes its sale of Alaska to the U.S. for less than 2 cents an acre. The U.S. acquired 600,000 square miles. Alfred Nobel invented dynamite. And I thought this was an interesting fact about him. In 1888, his brother was killed in an explosion based upon what he was developing with the dynamite. And the newspaper mistakenly printed the obituary as Alfred. And he was called the Merchant of Death and other terrible things in this obituary. And he was so affected by that he left the bulk of his estate to establish the Nobel Prizes for the betterment of humankind. And his original intent when he developed dynamite was it was going to be of a beneficial tool for miners and other things. He had no idea that it was going to end up being something that would kill so many people. So I thought that was interesting. He actually had his own obituary printed before he died, and it affected the rest of his life. 1868, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution overturns the Dred Scott decision, and all people born or naturalized in the United States are entitled to citizenship and civil protection. However, civil rights are not extended to Indians or anyone who held office in the Confederacy. So you can, but you can't really. Louise May Alcott publishes Little Women. General Ulysses S. Grant wins the presidential election. And Frank Rocky Fiegel was born in Poland. And I thought this was just kind of a fun little thing. Who would have thought Rocky would have been an interesting figure? But he was the inspiration for the Popeye character, created by L.C. Chrysler Seeger. Rocky immigrated to the U.S. and joined the Navy. And when he was with children, he held the pipe with the corner of his mouth, and he told them the stories of his youth. And he boasted about his physical strength and how loudly claiming that spinach is the food that makes him invincible. I just love Popeye. I love those cartoons. 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad is completed. The territory of Wyoming becomes the first state in the Union to give women the right to vote. And the air brake is patented for locomotives. And this was effectively the end of the pioneer era. So right here, and then this was pretty small, and hopefully you can see it, but this is the 1860 census of the United States. The U.S. resident population was 23 million at that time. The number of states were 30. And the lower chart shows the 10 largest urban cities. And they are all on the East Coast. And I love the fact that Brooklyn is on there. But it's just kind of an interesting snapshot of the country and the population. Now this next one, this looks the same, but this is the 1860 census. And the U.S. population is now 31 million. So in 10 years, it almost went 8-9 million. And the largest populations now are starting to move a little bit to the east. Cincinnati, Ohio, and Chicago. Brooklyn's still up there, though. Yeah. And there were 33 states in 1860. Now, this was a little bit about the telegraph. The telegraph was completed, a transcontinental telegraph, in 1861. This was really important to Utah because this was a way to get information and news and messages across the country. And Brigham Young realized that this was going to be critical for all of the outlying communities. So once they got to Salt Lake in 1847, colonization continued on. And so they were sending out groups of people to colonize to the south and to the north. And so he said, oh, this is how we're going to connect all of these communities by the telegraph. So he was trying to get this system set up. Now this first picture up here that shows them setting the poles, almost all of the poles that were set originally came from Carson City, Nevada, up in that area. And we actually had several LDS Mormon communities that were over in that area, in Genoa and Carson City. And so that's where they got most of the straight pine poles for the telegraph. This picture down here, which is very hard to see, but this is the picture of the first telegraph operators, and most of them were women. So the young women telegraphers, as young as 16, were selected and encouraged to be telegraphers, I guess. Telegraph stations were set up every 50 miles from Salt Lake to St. George in the south and Tooele to the north.
Weren't the majority of women operators in the nation?
Could be, yes. They thought that men would be more inclined to do it, but they usually had families, and so their need to be away working
in the movies you would see it's all women.
Yeah.
And the operators. I mean,
Yeah.
Did they set up the telegraph to come down here
Yeah.
before it was completed?
No, after it was completed across country in 1861, then they started developing the north and south in Utah. The girls would spend 3 months in Salt Lake for the training. Then they would come back to their home. The community would help set them up, either set up a telegraph place, or if they had a home, a place to do it, they would set it up in their home. And a lot of them stayed doing it even after they were married and were raising their families, because it was an easy thing for them to be able to do and continue doing and raise the family.
Do we know where the telegraph office was there?
Yes, actually, it was over the Brigham Young home. That office over there was one of the very first ones. They probably moved it because Brigham Young used that for his office, and yeah. So, how did pioneers learn of new changes, new advances? Well, when we talk about the pioneers and the colonization, and we have all of the stories about how people came to all of these communities down going south, and they came here and they had nothing. Everything they owned was in a wagon bed. So eventually, after they started their settlement, they wanted to get new things. They were still interested in what was happening in the world and get new ideas. Well, the missionary service where they sent people all over the world, they came back with knowledge, and they'd learned about all new things that were going on in different parts of the world. So the missionaries returning were bringing a lot of new ideas and information. And pioneers, by their nature of being a pioneer, they were very progressive. They were very inclined to embrace new technology and new ideas, and how difficult their lives were in making the trek across the plains and setting up new communities. They had to learn how to make things out of nothing. They had to be very creative and very inventive, so they were always open to new ideas. And we were getting more converts to the church, so more people from Europe and other parts of the world were coming here to live. And when they came here, they brought their culture and their ideas and things with them. So there was a little bit of a constant flow of new information coming from various sources. Contributions from pioneers. So a lot of the things that happened during that pioneer era were very important. But remember, there were children that were born and grandchildren that were born, and they came from that very intelligent, creative stock of people. So some of the things that were developed here was John Moses Browning. He was a native pioneer in Ogden, Utah, and he was born in 1855. He became interested in discarded gun parts, and at the age of 11, he crafted his first gun. And his father was a gun repair person. And his father challenged him to build a better gun, and he did.
So was Winchester and him competing, or was that?
Nope. It was a local, small place, and his father repaired guns, and he was just interested. And he just kind of crafted this up, and that was his idea. And it wasn't a great one. To be honest, his father said, "You could do better than that." And so he did. And when he got older, he kind of kept tweaking this gun that he had developed, and he later did sell it to Winchester Arms. And it became the most widely used single-shot rifle in the world. And he is credited with inventing the automatic rifle, pistol, shotgun, and machine gun.
So that was all before the Civil War, that was all invented?
This would have been during the war, because he was born in 55. So he'd have been young. But there's no fundamental changes in the firearm industry since Browning's death. He constantly kept inventing. Pardon?
He was the innovator.
He was the innovator, yes. And most of his original ideas are still used today. And
Teresa, if you haven't seen the Browning Museum in Ogden, it's worth a trip to Ogden to see it.
yes,
It's fantastic.
his whole family, it was his father, he and his brother, they all formed a company, and they were very, very innovative. Philo T. Farnsworth. Has anybody heard of Philo T. Farnsworth? Yeah. I have to tell you, I actually met him one day. He was very old when I met him, but I did meet him. Anyway, he was named for his grandfather, pioneer grandfather. He was born in Beaver in 1906, and he invented the technology that would revolutionize communication and entertainment. And he invented the image dissector or video camera tube, which evolved into the first television. And I think that's just amazing. Harvey Fletcher, also a son of a pioneer settler, Charles Fletcher, was born in Provo in 1884, and he graduated from BYU and was the first student to earn a PhD summa cum laude from the University of Chicago in physics. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics, and in 2016, he was awarded posthumously the Grammy Award for his contributions to sound research and recording. So these early pioneer inventors, their work goes on far, far beyond all of us. So what about you? Would you make a good pioneer? Yeah. So many things. We just live our lives, and we rely on all of this technology and things that have gone on before us, and we forget. So my ending thoughts would be, I would not be a good pioneer. I'm very good at honoring them, but I'm very grateful for everything that they did and they brought here, and the fact that they stayed here, and we have this beautiful community and a way to honor our pioneer heritage. So I wanted to thank the events committee. So would you please come up, Dixie? Come on. So this is Dixie Miller, and Ruth Snar on the end, and this is Sue Blazard. Nancy Carlton is not here. And we have a special person, Marilyn McClellan. Come on, Marilyn. Marilyn McClellan has been on our committee for a very, very long time. And she, all of these ladies, they make our event program possible. Without them and their time and dedication and great ideas, we wouldn't have this ability to have these events. So I just wanted to say thank you and make sure that everybody knows who they are. These are the ones who make our events possible. So thank you. Thank you very much. Is that my end? Thank you for coming. Yeah.
We want to thank Teresa for giving us a very interesting and insight program. That was amazing. Some of the things they developed, I had no idea that some of them went so far. A safety pin. Oh, that was really a good one. We're not going to have any more programs until September, when we will start our third weekend event again. Hope you all have a great summer. Do visit our museum upstairs. Tell other people about our programs and our museum. We'd appreciate it. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah.
So much to learn.
Nobody went to sleep, I noticed.
I want you to turn it back and see my great-grandmother was a telegraph operator.
You want to see that picture?
Is that in the book?
Yes, it was in the lesson book. Oh. I don't know if it tells the names. It might do, but you'd have to look.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Thanks for all of these. I just love them.
yeah, and it's very fun. Yeah.
Cool. Thank
If you ever have any ideas on something that you would, think might be of interest, let us know because we would love to have it.
That's when I do the Mormon Battalion thing.
Yes, you did. And you know what?
And we do one on our own.
We ought to